Hello, you're live with BBC News and we're following the 81st anniversary commemorations of D-Day today. Welcome, we are live from London in the UK. We're looking at some live pictures right now of a memorial ceremony in Normandy. I think we can take you actually quickly to those pictures. There they are, look, where the French Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu is currently giving a speech. In fact, can we hear some of that sound? Let's listen in. So you have a little bit of that pomp that's been going on throughout the day. It is, of course, a huge day for many countries around the world. The 81st anniversary commemorations of D-Day today. What we're looking at the moment are live pictures of a memorial ceremony in Normandy, where the French Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu is currently giving a speech. Now, earlier, the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth and the UK Defence Secretary John Healey both arrived earlier on, and we are expecting both of them to make remarks in a little while, and we'll go straight to that when they start. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, I'm sure lots of you will know, but what is D-Day? Well, on the 6th of June 1944, troops from the UK, US, Canada and France attacked German forces on the coast of northern France. Now, D-Day itself was the largest military seaborne operation ever attempted and marked the start of the campaign to liberate Nazi-occupied northwest Europe. It involved the simultaneous landing of tens of dozens of troops on 5 separate beaches in Normandy. The operation itself actually took more than a year, believe it or not, to plan, and was originally set to launch on the 5th of June, but a storm actually delayed it by 24 hours. And a simple question that many people ask these days is, what does the D stand for? Well, D simply stands for day. And D-Day is a military term for the first day of an operation. Now, in just a few minutes' time, I think we'll be able to cross over to our correspondent, Hugh Schofield, who is in Paris, while we look at those pictures, those live pictures of that ceremony. In fact, Hugh is there now. Hi there, Hugh.
I am here. Hello.
Hello there. You're live from Paris. Let's just talk about how significant this is. You know, this is a meeting today between these countries at a time where there's so much uncertainty. But today they come together to talk about one thing, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's the 81st anniversary. It's obviously not quite as momentous as the 80th anniversary last year, which was a very, very big deal because it was, I think, seen as the sort of last of the big numbers. We've had the 75th, we had the 70th. Looking back, we had I remember the 50th in 94, and that was one huge commemoration. Times are moving on, though. Times are changing. Memories are slipping, as you have obviously realise, we all have. You can't assume that everyone knows what this is all about anymore. It's for someone of my age, it's all quite poignant, really, because you're realising how this is slipping over the horizon of history, and the bare facts have to be remembered every time. When I started reporting D-Days all that time ago, I mean, you didn't have to say anything. You just said D-Day. Everyone knew automatically what you were talking about because everyone either remembered it or certainly had family members who were closely involved. So memories are slipping. 81st anniversary, not the most important compared to last year, but nonetheless, we have a new a new climate, a new atmosphere in Europe, new things are happening, and suddenly the prospect of conflict is something which we were thanking ourselves and our forefathers for having kind of saved us from. We're now saying, well, actually, maybe that same prospect is back. A prospect of war of a different nature, but I mean, no one's laughing that off now. It's a very real possibility, and so suddenly the memory of what people were willing to do then, the notion of sacrifice, military sacrifice by the men and women of those days, is suddenly much more real. And we're asking ourselves, well, what would we do now if suddenly something goes horribly wrong in the next months? Would we have the same pluck and gumption and courage and commitment and sense of sacrifice that people had back then? And that is what I think makes these occasions every year so poignant, and the more so now given this context.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, things are so turbulent at the moment, isn't it? Across the world between countries. And this really, is hopefully showing that they're maybe perhaps strengthening their bonds, Hugh?
Yes, well, I mean, I was listening to Peter Hesketh, I always get this wrong.
I know, it's a hard one to say.
On, and with the French, he knows that he has to be politic and diplomatic today. He is not saying anything off script. He is saying what American leaders always say on these occasions, which is, paying tribute to the shared sacrifice, remembering the bond, remembering how our countries were brought together in that time of trial, and by implication suggesting and hoping that the same sense of mutual commitment can be recreated. So he's talked about mutual sacrifice. He hasn't talked about, you're not doing your bit anymore. It's because it would be totally out of place. So that we look at the goods, we get a positive spin today about, and there's hope. There's a sense that we do still share values, and if it comes to it, we will be side by side with the Americans again. But I think deep down everyone knows that once today has gone past and that the memories are no longer being evoked in the same way, everyone will go back to the other script, which is finger pointing from the Americans at the Europeans, saying, look, you've got to get your own act together. Don't expect us always to be hanging around, willing to cross the ocean as we did twice last century to get you out of your own difficulties. I mean, that presumption, which sustained us all for decades, has gone, and it's a very bewildering feeling we're all left with.
I mean, it must be difficult, though, to stick to the script, as you say. I mean, it must be hard to kind of bite your tongue when so much is going on. Donald Trump is always in the news at the minute. I'm literally looking at the BBC Live page now, another story about Trump. It just never ends, does it? But maybe today is a day where you just put, like you say, you just put that aside for something that is so big and something that we need to not forget.
I think. The experience of being on the Normandy beaches and going to the Colville American Cemetery, going to the Vers-sur-Mer British Memorial there, is something which will touch the hardest of hearts. It's very, very hard to stand there and disregard the feelings and the years of emotion and just the power of history which overcomes you there. So I don't think it's difficult really for them to say the obvious things, and the obvious things are the right things, and they're the things that have to be said today about honouring the memory of these people who did, or these ordinary people who did such extraordinary things on that day and in the campaign that followed. It's not difficult to be on message, I think, because the weight of history and the beauty of the place and the stunning nature of the scenery as you look out to the sea, and you can't do that without thinking of that morning of the 6th of June and seeing what the German troops must have seen then, which is the transformation of an empty sea to one that is just like a bathtub full of children's toys, ships everywhere you look, ships, boats arriving, transformed overnight. And that sense of wonder hits everyone. And I'm sure it's hitting Pete Hegseth as well, So I think they'll be on message because, it's real what happened then. And any American any European feels it very, very deeply.
I want to hear more about your experiences at these ceremonies. I know you've been to many, as you mentioned there. I think you were at the 51st one. Before we talk more, though, Hugh, let's just listen in to these live pictures. I think we can hear the French Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu.
Et envoie au général Bradley le message suivant: plage nettoyée, route en construction, peu d'opposition. Dès la fin de matinée, la jonction avec les parachutistes de la 101e division aéroportée est réalisée. En fin de journée, 23 250 hommes et 1700 véhicules ont débarqué sur cette plage. Le débarquement sur Utah Beach est un succès complet. Les unités de l'armée de terre déplorent cependant la perte de 591 tués, blessés et disparus, et la marine compte 278 pertes. Monsieur Lecornu, ministre des Armées, va remettre la distinction de chevalier de la Légion d'honneur à Monsieur Donald Carter, vétéran du 44e bataillon d'artillerie de la 4e division d'infanterie, qui a débarqué sur cette plage le 8 juin 1944.
You're with BBC News Live, and we're following the 81st anniversary commemorations of D-Day today. What you're looking at the moment are some live pictures of a memorial ceremony at Omaha Beach, where the French Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu is currently giving a speech. I think he's just finished his speech, actually, just within the past couple of seconds. We've been speaking to Hugh Schofield, our correspondent, and Hugh, you've been to many, I think, am I right in saying many of these ceremonies?
Yes, yeah.
Tell me what it's like being there. We're looking at these live pictures right now, and it must be quite emotional.
Well, I'll tell you what it was like, and I'll tell you what it is like now. And what it was like back when I started was, an incredibly moving experience, because you were surrounded by people who'd fought there. Back in the 90s when I first went, there were loads, hundreds, thousands of people who fought, and so there was no shortage of people who you could talk to and get memories from. There were British paratroopers who'd landed in the gliders along the canal near Ouistreham. There were Americans who'd been airborne, who'd come in with the 101st up at the top end of the peninsula. There were, of course, many others who'd arrived on the boats. There were people the Americans who'd stormed the Pointe de Hoc. That was the frighteningly sturdy German stronghold at the top of the cliffs towards the top end of the beaches. You met them all, and they would walk you through it, and it was an extraordinary experience to talk to these perfectly healthy late middle-aged men and get them to remember. Nowadays, you go back and you're talking to old men who are the sons of veterans. You're talking to people who are talking about their memories of their father's recollections. There are, of course, a few very brave old men now in their late 90s and the hundreds who are still there, and we honour them. But I mean, last year they were at Arromanches, where they built the Mulberry Harbour, the famous harbour that brought in the provisions and the tanks and everything else when they sort of established themselves there. There were, I don't know, a sort of 20, 30, 40 men there. Compared that to the thousands of people who were there when I was first covering these events, it's very sad, but of course inevitable. And I find it endlessly poignant, this feeling of history disappearing and memories disappearing. I remember it from the first war. When I was a lad, there were plenty of people around who remembered the First World War, and at school they would turn up in their uniforms, their Chelsea pensioners outfit and so on, and we'd all remember. And they were people who'd fought in the First World War. Then they started dwindling and disappearing, and now we're having exactly the same thing in the Second World War. And it's a very, what we have now, I feel, is a kind of memory of a memory. What I'm remembering is that sort of poignancy of the memory in the 70s, 80s, 90s, when it was so real still, because there were families that were still so deeply touched by it. But now it's doing what it has to do, which is disappear into the past, and we're remembering as we have to. But it's not. It's a different kind of memory now.
It's worrying, though, isn't it? I mean, I was speaking to a veteran not so long ago, and the family story of a veteran, and they were so worried that the memories and the experiences and everything that they've gone through will be lost. How do you document these things? How do you keep hold of those memories? You know, I totally agree that it's very difficult as time goes on. That, you know, to keep these memories and experiences going and keep that history alive.
Yeah, but you've got to be careful not to sort of pickle everything as well. I mean, I think we have to recognise that time will move on, and there's been a huge work of memorialising that's gone on. The construction of the British Memorial at Vers-sur-Mer, absolutely beautiful thing, which went up, 5 years ago, when everyone realised there was no British permanent memorial for the whole British effort, and that where the names of all the British troops who died in the Normandy campaign, because remember it goes on, up until August of that year, and they're all inscribed there. That's a work of memorialising. It won't be forgotten. But again, I don't think we should sort of set in stone. It is set in stone, but we shouldn't be scared of the fact that it is going to disappear into history. We have to live in our own ages. We don't feel about the Napoleonic Wars now with any sense of teariness or sadness. So they were 200 years ago. In 100 years, will people feel about the same thing about this war and the First World War? Well, they'll remember them, of course, because we have now moving images and the cemeteries, the beautiful graves that are tended so beautifully and so on. But the relationship with it will be different in 100 years from now, and it's quite right that it will be different from what it is now.
Yeah. Well, Hugh, just have a rest for a second. Let me just remind people watching, what is D-Day? Because I think we spoke a little earlier on about, we have to kind of remind people now exactly what is D-Day. Back in the day, people just knew, but let me just remind you again, it was on the 6th of June, so 1944, 81 years ago, that troops from the UK, US, Canada and France attacked German forces on the coast of northern France. Now, D-Day was the largest military seaborne operation ever attempted, and it actually marked the start of the campaign to liberate Nazi-occupied northwest Europe. It involved the simultaneous landing of tens of thousands of troops on 5 separate beaches in Normandy. And the operation took more than a year to plan and was originally set to launch on the 5th of June, but a storm delayed it by 24 hours. Now, if you're wondering what D stands for, D simply stands for day, and D-Day is a military term for the first day of an operation. With me is our correspondent, Hugh Schofield. Hugh, you were just talking about your experiences at a lot of these ceremonies. Tell me about just some of the things that maybe the veterans and the families have spoken to you about in the past and what they've told you.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to remember. I mean, there was one very big anniversary. I think it was the 60th, which I think was the last one when there was a significant number of veterans there, and that would be 2004. And I remember there going into a glider which they brought over. King Charles and Prince Charles was there as well. The gliders were a very, very important part of all of this, at least a very romantic and memorable part of all of this. And if you've seen the film The Longest Day, you'll know what it's all about, because one part of the British operation was to send a kind of airborne force to land behind German lines, so well back from the beaches, and to secure a kind of line along the canal. There's a canal that goes from Caen down to the seaside at Ouistreham, and they were to secure this. This is where the famous Pegasus Bridge is still. So the gliders had to do this very, very daring thing to land at night on marshy land, and then establish these positions. And with us there on that day, 60 years on, was one of the pilots of that landing, and it was a tremendous experience to hear from his lips, you know, a perfectly fit Hale man, still, you know, remembering these things, which, you know, for anyone who, I mean, time is very funny when you're born at a certain year. Things that happened 15 years before seem like they're in ancient history, but it was only 15 years before. So for me, in my generation, born in the 60s, the Second World War was something that you just seemed like from a different epoch. It could have been like the sort of Peloponnesian Wars. But of course, it was only 15 years before we were born. So to see somebody as, you know, hale and hearty talking about landing in a glider in this legendary manoeuvre which the Air Force carried out that night was absolutely tremendous.
Oh, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's absolutely. I can't even remember what happened yesterday. Never mind, 81 years ago. Hugh, what lessons do you think can still be learned today from having anniversaries like this?
Well, I mean, just the obvious ones. I mean, you know, there's no sort of secret behind any of this. I mean, you know, you just got to think, take a step back and think about the awe-inspiring nature of what happened, and I mean, it's a very beautiful thought, you know, that all these people could come together from different nations to do something that required so much planning, so much organisation, so much commitment, so much sacrifice, so much bravery, to cross the sea after months and months and months of planning, you know, and all that planning, the arrival of the Americans in the United Kingdom, the build-up of forces, the training, the practice runs, all the accidents that happened and people died in, and then for it all to come to this sort of pinprick of history, everything like a funnel of history. You imagine a kind of funnel of everything going on behind it, all coming down to this one moment and place in time, the 6th of June at a few kilometres of beach. Everything is concentrated at this one point at one time, and from there on the other side it all debouches out in the other direction, and happily for us it was a happy outcome, but might not have been, and you know, that's all part of it. And if there's a message, it's simply that, you know, when you know, you need to, it's very important to come together and make these sacrifices, and people did it then, and there's no reason on earth why it can't happen again if it comes to it.
For sure. And we're just looking at some live pictures now. I think the veterans have arrived. They are the war veterans commemorating the anniversary of D-Day at an international ceremony being held at the moment at Utah Beach. Landing Museum, the US Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is there. The French Armed Forces Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, is also there. He's been speaking already to the dignitaries and the veterans who have made it there today. Looks like they've got nice weather for it as well, which always makes a big difference. We've also got, once these speeches come to a close, it'll be followed by wreath laying and tributes to the fallen. We've also got, as well, it's good to mention, the British Defence Secretary John Healey there as well in attendance. Just one of many ceremonies going on throughout the day to commemorate the 81st anniversary of D-Day. I'm going to bring back in our correspondent Hugh Schofield. Hugh, how would you say D-Day is seen in other countries like France? Like, is it taught in schools like it is in England?
Yes, it's certainly part of every child's history education. Les débarquements, as they call them, are extremely important in the curriculum. I would say that the relationship that people have with them is different, though, because, of course, there is in France not the overwhelming pride that we have in Britain and the United States and Canada with what happened, because our armies, the British, American, Canadian armies, were the main contributing forces, and we were liberating another country. We were liberating Europe from a threat which we all felt, so it wasn't as if we were just doing it on behalf of the French, but nonetheless, the French will always feel not perhaps shamefaced, but slightly what's the word? I mean, slightly embarrassed. It's not even embarrassment, but they're slightly gênés, as they would say in French. It's slightly awkward for them because they weren't part of the main attack. And they always concentrate in France on the fact that there was 1,000 or so men from a detachment that did take part, and very honourably and very nobly and bravely, there was this small detachment of French troops who came over with the Allies then. But of course, in the scheme of things, it was a tiny detachment. And then, of course, the French will also talk much about the role of the resistance. And in the resistance on that day and the day before, the 5th of June, did a lot of actions around the country. The word went out from London, de Gaulle, now's the time, blow up those railway tracks. And that happened. And, efforts were made by the secret army of resistance to hinder the reinforcements that were coming to Normandy beaches and so on. But again, in the scheme of things, set against the monumental industrial effort and the sacrifice of the thousands and thousands of men who came over in the fleet on D-Day, the French contribution was small. One has just got to say that. And so I think always they will feel in France that it's their celebration, but it's also not their celebration. They're celebrating being liberated rather than liberating themselves. And there was, of course, after the war, a big mythology that was built up in France that minimised this awkwardness and made as much as possible of the French kind of commitment and sacrifice and the role of the resistance and so on. But that myth has been slightly blown apart in recent years. It was a necessary myth in order to sort of re-establish unity in France after the war. But I think historians now agree that a lot of exaggeration went on when people talk in those days about the role of the resistance, and certainly when it came to D-Day and the battle for France and the campaign out of the Normandy beachheads up to Paris and then on to Belgium, that was an Allied effort. Britain, America, Canada, and a French army did come in later on, and they played a very honourable role in all of this, but their role was small compared to that of the other allies.
It's fascinating hearing your experience of these ceremonies. I haven't been to too many of them. I've only been to one or two myself, but just looking at those live pictures. At the moment, we've been watching various people making their speeches, including the French Minister of Armed Forces a little earlier on, Sébastien Lecornu. You are with BBC News here live from London following the 81st anniversary commemorations of D-Day. Today, we are live at a ceremony, as we can see, in Normandy. These are live pictures where the French Defence Minister has just finished giving his speech. A little earlier, the US Secretary Pete Hegseth and the US Defence Secretary John Healey both arrived earlier on, and we are expecting both of them to make remarks shortly, and we'll go to that when they start. We've also seen the crowds there as well, well attended by not just dignitaries, but we've got the war veterans as well. It'll be a very, very proud day for them, I know, and thank goodness it's not raining. That's all I can say. We've got great weather in Normandy. Let's just have a quick listen in.
Américaine et alliée, ce n'est pas une évidence, c'est un privilège. C'est aussi un signe de confiance de la part de nos partenaires, alliés et amis. Je tiens à remercier chaleureusement nos hôtes français. Depuis plus de 20 ans, lors des commémorations, vous accueillez ici en Normandie les soldats allemands. Ce geste montre l'essence même de ce qui rend l'Europe si précieuse. La volonté de se réconcilier, même là où l'histoire a laissé des blessures profondes. Aujourd'hui, nous honorons le courage des soldats alliés, la souffrance des civils et la fin d'une idéologie de haine. Mais nous pensons aussi au présent et au demain. La présence ici, aujourd'hui, des jeunes soldats allemands est un symbole fort d'un avenir commun, d'un engagement conjoint pour défendre notre liberté, d'une Allemagne profondément européenne engagée aux côtés de ses partenaires au sein de l'Union européenne et au sein de l'OTAN. Mesdames et messieurs, la commémoration du débarquement est aussi un moment plein d'espoir. Car cette journée nous rappelle que des anciens ennemis marchent aujourd'hui côte à côte, que le souvenir s'est transformé en devoir que nous acceptons avec beaucoup d'humilité. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
So you are watching the ceremony which is happening in Normandy right now to commemorate the 81st anniversary of D-Day today. Official events are taking place to mark the anniversary across the UK and France. Let's listen in now to Jessica Leigh.
This is it. They're on the beach, plunging waist deep into the sea.
81 years ago, the largest ever group of Allied troops, ships and vehicles all arrived here in Normandy, hoping to defeat Hitler's armies from land, sea and air. Thousands died and many more were wounded. Today, the sun rose over those who came to remember.
People that have been coming back year on year, for 50 years, there's always a tear in their eye when they walk up and down and just see the memorial and the great welcome that the French, and it's not just the French here, there's Belgium, there's Dutch, there's even German supporters here as well, and it's very emotional.
On Gold Beach in Normandy, kayakers were piped ashore. Then local school children greeted Royal Marines and exchanged gifts.
We were stood on that landing craft, and as the ramp went down, it was one of the most poignant moments of our lives, because we couldn't help but imagine what it must have been like for our forebears who did it for real. Last year was obviously a big anniversary, the 80th. The important thing is that we do this every year because we need to keep the memories alive.
Defence Secretary John Healey joined others laying wreaths as part of this ceremony at the British Normandy Memorial at Vers-sur-Mer.
Remember here on this memorial the 22,442 brave servicemen and women under British command who fought and fell in the Normandy campaign. But the legacy of the fallen and the courage, determination and commitment of all those who fought in the campaign has given us the Europe in which we live today.
Watched by a few surviving veterans and groups of children, generations gathered together to give thanks.
At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
You're with BBC News live from London here in the UK. We're following the 81st anniversary of D-Day today. We think we can look at some live pictures at a memorial ceremony we've been following in Normandy, where the French Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu he's given a speech there. We'll hear a little later on from the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth and the UK Defence Secretary John Healey. But I just want to bring Hugh, our correspondent Hugh Schofield, back in. Hugh, you were talking earlier on a little bit about, the friendship between the countries, honouring the courage of allies. We've got the presence of young German soldiers there today, which is extremely poignant. Ancient enemies marching side by side. Will commemorations, do you think, will they look different as the years go on? Maybe next year fewer veterans may survive, and will it be more difficult to keep that memory alive of what happened all those years ago?
I think they'll just have to change in nature slightly. Of course, as what I was saying before, it is changing already. I mean, the number of veterans has fallen so dramatically, and now we just see a vestige of all those brave men who for many years kept on coming back, and now there's just a handful of them, and soon they'll all be gone. Soon we'll be remembering something which really is over the lip of history, and a bit like when we celebrated the 100 years of the First World War a few years ago. In the absence of any veterans, it'll be like that. It'll be a historical thing. And that's absolutely fine. I mean, there's no point in trying to pretend that it could be any other way. It will feel different. It will feel different. And I think, I remember feeling slightly when I went to the Somme, for example, 100 years after the First World War and the 1916 Battle of the Somme, and feeling that a lot of the emotion which I remembered attaching to the First World War had gone. It wasn't there anymore. When I first started going there were people crying because they were really remembering people. And now it was school children, with leaving notes saying thank you, Granddaddy, for whatever you did, and all this sort of stuff, and which was poignant in its own way, but it was completely different, and it was a slightly artificial and forced emotion I felt sometimes. That's what's going to happen with the Second World War as well. It'll become something which we talk a lot about, but we won't have the same feeling towards it as people had before. How could we? And there's no point in running away from that. I think what we've got to do is make clear that this is something important. It's part of our history, and we commemorate it every year as we do, in a different way maybe, but as we do, with royalty going on the big occasions and defence ministers and army chiefs going there every year to remember what it stands for. I mean, what it stands for is, the values of Western Europe, which were shared by the United States of America and by other countries around the world who came together to stop a different set of values taking over in Europe, and that has a resonance which will ring through the ages, and particularly now when we're all worried about whether that alliance is able to stand up, and whether in our nations we have the same kind of cohesion that people had back then. I mean, I think that's the other thing that people worry about, quite rightly. Back then, our countries, our nations were homogeneous. We're all, the immigration had been minimal. So it was very obvious that we would all come together and fight for the common cause. Now our countries are multifarious. They're very different places. They're enriched in many ways. But is it? But I remember last year there were these polls that came out suggesting that only 30-40% of young people would fight for their country. I mean, that sort of alarm bell is concerning. If we are approaching a time when suddenly the sacrifice of war is necessary again, that figure would have really shocked the generation of 1944. Because back then, 100% of young people would have fought for their country.
For sure. Well, listen, Hugh, let me just introduce Helen Fry. She's been speaking to Matthew a little earlier on. She's a Second World War historian and an expert in the Allies' intelligence operations. She was talking about a little earlier on the significance of this anniversary.
It's the 81st anniversary, but still so important to remember. And I think of those surviving veterans, you can see them there. Of course, they're coming to remember their colleagues who didn't make it back. It's a very, very important day for them and a very important pilgrimage, but also for our nations and for the Allied nations.
We'll talk about the planning in a moment, but it is difficult, isn't it, to exaggerate the bravery and also the terror for all of those Allied troops on that day.
It is, and I interviewed some of them during their lifetime, and they had a mixture of excitement going to liberate Europe, but also fear as they approached those beaches. And let's not forget, the conditions were terrible. The weather was bad, and the sea was stormy. They arrived seasick. They ploughed through, off the landing crafts into the water, up the beaches, heavily shelled by the Germans, and dead littered everywhere. The sights were pretty horrifying for them, and incredibly difficult conditions to get up that beach.
It remains, of course, one of the most incredible military operations that we've ever seen. The planning, the decoys, the execution.
It was. All of this wouldn't have been so successful, or the casualties would have been far greater if we hadn't planned a whole series of deceptions at least 9 months before. And that all began from around the autumn of 1943, and we had false aircraft, dummied airfields, we had double agents working, including women actually. So famously Garbo, who saved D-Day, he's well known, but there were a whole raft of women that fed deception to their German handlers that the D-Day landings were going to happen near the Pas de Calais, or even as far down as Bordeaux. So we remember them today as well. They're all part of this backdrop. And let's not forget the men and women, 2/3 of the women at Bletchley Park, who again played their part. And at other secret intelligence sites in the UK, they all planned a picture of what these troops would be landing on, what they would face, and they were prepared.
And just remind viewers, I talked about casualties on the 6th of June, but remind us, how many Allied troops were there in total that stormed the beaches?
There were 150,000 Allied troops, American, British, but of course let's not forget Canadians and others as well. And it was so far the largest amphibious landing, was a combined air-sea land operation, but it was the largest in history so far of such an amphibious landing, and very ambitious. I mean, they didn't know if they could really pull it off, but thankfully we're here today with our freedoms thanks to those incredibly brave men who, ones that I interviewed, they never saw themselves as brave. That's what's so humbling. And I guess, you know, many of those veterans, if you were to talk to them today in Omaha and in the other Normandy beaches, they don't think that they were heroes, but they are, aren't they? They are our nation's heroes.
You're with BBC News Live, and we're following the 81st anniversary commemorations of D-Day today. What you're looking at the moment are some live pictures of a memorial ceremony in Normandy where the French Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu has given a speech. Let's just have a little listen in to the next speaker. We've had a few of these dignitaries coming up to the podium, giving them a speech, both in French and English. Also, you can see in the background there some of the veterans. It's going to be a very, very proud day for them and their families as well. We'll have a little listen in just a minute's time. There we go.
Dear veterans, Monsieur le Ministre des Armées, Mr. Secretary of Defense, Mr. State Secretary of Defense, Monsieur le Préfet, Mesdames et Messieurs les parlementaires et les élus, ladies and gentlemen, today we stand here on sacred ground, a place where 81 years ago thousands of young men gave their lives for something bigger than themselves: freedom, democracy, and peace. Among them were also Dutchmen, pilots, Marines, resistance fighters, who fought shoulder to shoulder with their allies for a free Europe. Without American commitment, support and cooperation, that liberation would have been unthinkable. Together with British, Canadians, French, Poles, and many others, they showed us what is possible when free nations unite in resisting tyranny. D-Day was not just a military operation, it is a moral compass. It showed that cooperation between nations, even in the darkest of times, can make all the difference. The moral compass was and is still vital today, because even now, European peace is under pressure. The war on our continent confronts us with the same questions as then. What is our responsibility? What are we willing to do for freedom and security? Remembering D-Day does not only mean looking back, it also means recognizing that peace can never be taken for granted. It requires vigilance, preparedness, and investment. It requires unity, and it requires the courage to act when our values are threatened. We are prepared to do our share. We're doing that with regard to Ukraine. We're doing that in NATO. And we will step up our efforts. Because today, we honor the past, but we also reaffirm our commitment to the future. For a world that stands for freedom, for solidarity between peoples, and for an international legal order based on common principles and common interests and the unshakable will to defend them. let us carry that pledge written here on June 6, 1944, in sacrifice and courage, today with renewed determination. Thank you very much.
Allocution de Monsieur Leigh, secrétaire d'État à la Défense du Royaume-Uni de Grande-Bretagne et d'Irlande du Nord.
Bonjour tout le monde. 81 years ago today, tyranny bowed when the courage of free men forced open the gates of liberation. Within hours, the people of Saint-Mary-l'Église had control of their destiny again. Within 3 months, the tricolour once again flew from the Eiffel Tower. Within a year, the continent of Europe would once again know peace. It is a rare thing to have changed the course of history, but that is what the veterans of Normandy did. They fought for a future that they knew they may not live to see. And through their valour, we inherited a free world. We are humbled to be in your company. We give eternal thanks for your sacrifice. And I'm also grateful to the Comité Débarquement as the stewards of our shared history. With every year that passes, your work becomes more important. And 81 years on, we return to Normandy to ask, what principle guided 150,000 souls across that body of water? What belief compelled the paratroopers of the 82nd and the 101st to thunder through the skies above us? What force drove the Ivy men to charge these dunes at Utah? All to liberate people they had never known in a land they had never seen. And that is the power of unity, the power of friendship, the faith in democracy and freedom. And through the sacrifices made on these shores, we learned the true strength of alliances, the strength of our warfighters standing together as they continue to do on operations today. Personnel from Manchester, from Marseille, from Minnesota. The strength of our nations standing together in NATO to deter current conflicts and adversaries. The responsibility to safeguard D-Day's legacy of freedom rests today with us. So let us give everlasting honour to our Normandy veterans, for whom the longest day never ended. And let us find the strength to carry on in their names and to carry forward their cause. Thank you.
The British Defence Secretary John Healey there speaking at the ceremony which is happening in Normandy. You're with BBC News Live. We're following the 81st anniversary commemorations of D-Day today. The pictures you're looking at the minute is of a memorial ceremony in Normandy where the French Defence Secretary Sébastien Lecornu has been speaking along with the British Defence Secretary John Healey. We're also about to hear the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth. Let's listen in.
And of course, our heroes, the men of that day, the men of those days, the men of those weeks, the families and communities who loved them, who clung to a photo and newspaper clippings with an understanding that young men from farm towns and city kids, rich and poor in all backgrounds, had sailed to a land far away to fight for people they never knew. Because in America and across the free world, we fight not because we hate what's in front of us, but because we love what's behind us. It's a special kind of love, a love that recognizes and understands that it requires sacrifice. You see, when I think of June the 6th, all I think of is the price of freedom. All I think of is what it took to walk off the back of a ramp on a Higgins boat, bullets whizzing, bombs dropping, waves crashing, equipment clamoring on your body, trying to stay afloat, trying to find cover, trying to find a medic, trying to find a bunker, all while under unrelenting fire with almost no chance of success. What motivates a man to do such thing? I think it's love. Not just love for your country or love for a cause, but love for one another. Which when you ask those men, they remember the man on their right and on their left. They remember the nurse that cared for them. They remember those that rest here, who we honor today, who we will never forget. You see, their legacy is a gift to us. And the question is, what will we do with it? Will we live worthy of it? And today I think it's a moment to ask all of ourselves the very same question. Could I do that? Could you do that? Could we do that? Could our countries muster that? Do we believe in ourselves enough to invest in ourselves, to project power, to defend freedom, and deter war? That's our question. That's our job at every level, from the Secretary of Defense to the Minister of Defense in France and the UK, NATO, and across the world. But also down to each family, each parent, each community, each school, each church. Are we raising up young men and women who understand the price of freedom, who understand that history is not over, who understand that there's goodness and there's brotherhood and there's things worth fighting for? But in order to cherish and have those things worth fighting for, you have to be willing to stand for them when it matters the most. So I want to thank all the troops here today from all countries, the flags behind us, the coalition that continues to this day, our friends in France who continue, as you drive through these beautiful towns, to wave American flags, to wave British flags, to wave Canadian flags, because they have not forgotten. And may we, as leaders, as troops, and as citizens, never forget ourselves. Long live the American Republic. Long live the French Republic. And may God bless the heroes of June the 6th. Thank you.
The US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth speaking there at the ceremony, which is happening over in Normandy at the moment. There we have some live pictures. We've been following it here at BBC News throughout the day. Very interesting to hear from the US Defense Secretary. We've also heard from Sébastien Lecornu, the French Minister of Armed Forces. We'll just have a quick listen back in.
Les secrétaires à la défense des États-Unis et du Royaume-Uni, cher Pete, cher John, mesdames et messieurs les représentants des autorités civiles et militaires, nationales, internationales et locales. Alors qu'ils attendaient au large l'ordre de se lancer à l'assaut du mur de l'Atlantique, les soldats du 6 juin ont vu une lame fendre la nuit. Cette lame, c'était la ligne d'horizon éclairée par les premières lueurs de l'aube, et cette ligne à l'horizon, c'était la terre de France. Il y a 81 années, à 5h58 très exactement, le soleil se leva sur les plages d'Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau et Sword Beach. Et c'est ici, à 6h30, que la bataille de Normandie a commencé. Ce jour allait être le jour le plus long et sans doute le plus décisif, non seulement pour la libération de la France, mais pour la victoire et pour la paix.
So that is Sébastien Lecornu, the French Minister of Armed Forces. We heard from him a little earlier on today. He's speaking again at this ceremony in Normandy. We've already heard from the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth and British Defence Secretary John Healey. We're live at Utah Beach in Normandy, where 34,000 Americans came ashore alone on June the 6th. 81 years ago. We're going to bring Hugh Schofield, our correspondent, back in just to have a quick chat off the back of those very poignant and actually quite emotional speeches there given by those leaders. Hugh, I just want to talk about, hearing from the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth. He said a few interesting things there, talking about a special kind of love. It feels at the minute like we've lost that love, Hugh, at the moment, would you say?
Well, what I was struck by those speeches, I was struck by how, the Dutch, Healey for us, the Brits said, the predictable stuff. It has to be said, and there's nothing wrong with it at all. Pete Hegseth came out with a far more punchy and hard-hitting reaction, and his speech could be summed up in the words which he uttered in the middle of it all. Could we do that now? And that for me is a key question, and I think he's right to ask it. I found that the others slightly kind of bromide-like in their utterances because they're very, very predictable, and that was fine. But I felt Hegseth went to the nub of it. If you're going to talk about their example, and if you're going to talk about the dangers of today, then you have to come down to this basic fact, which is that they did that then, and could we do that now? That question, could we do that now? And as he then went on to say, it's not just governments, it's every community, it's every family asking themselves the question, would we be prepared to ourselves go or see our children go and fight and die in a similar way to the way that those men went to fight and die in the cause that they all believed in. And I think that when you ask that question, it is something which, I think the answer might well be troubling. I think, around me, I talk to people and my children, the other children, and they're so ambivalent about what the world is at the moment. They're not at all. They don't take it as axiomatically true that they would go out and fight for their countries. I don't think. I think they're questioning the world around them in a way which makes it maybe doubtful that they would, and that I think is very worrying. And so I think all this as a kind of wake-up call and as a moment to reflect on what we have and why we have it and how it could easily disappear again. It's very important.
Yeah, I think what he said was, what will we do with their legacy? Could I do that? Could we do that? Could our countries do that? And like you say, it's a very, very interesting question that I'd love to know the answers from people watching around the world. And you talked about a little earlier on, Hugh, as well, about talking about the importance of coming together and becoming, I don't know, maybe these ceremonies are becoming more and more important these days. Is that what you think, maybe, as time goes on, 81 years ago this happened, do you think these ceremonies are actually more of a platform to give out that message,
Well, I think two things are happening. One is that the purely personal, emotional side is disappearing, obviously. You're not getting the tears which you used to get because people were remembering people they loved who died there. You're losing that. It's disappearing, and that's fine. What you're getting instead is an idea, a notion, a principle, taking precedence, and I mean that's why we will keep remembering the débarquement, the D-Day, because it's become an emblem of something so important. And so as I mean, it's interesting that as that personal side disappears, we're confronting this question about the importance of the alliance and of coming together and of nations fighting for freedom. And maybe it's not a coincidence that these two things are happening at the same time, because maybe our attachment to freedom and so on, it's something we've just taken for granted, because for so long we've lived with the actual memory of the war and the actual sacrifice and personal memories of it all, and we've lived in the glowing, wondrous decades that followed it, where there was economic growth and freedom, and we were proclaiming our freedom to the world, and everyone was jealous of us for being so free in Western Europe. And now, we maybe have taken it for granted so long. Time has passed, and it's in danger. All these freedoms, they're in danger, and we've lost the knack of thinking that they had to be fought for. We've forgotten that we actually fought for them. So it is a key time here where the personal memory disappears, but the point of it all starts becoming more in focus.
Hugh, just hold on there just a moment. We heard a little earlier on from Sébastien Lecornu, the French Minister of Armed Forces, and we've also heard as well from the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth. But let's just have a listen back to what the British Defence Secretary John Healey had to say.
Bonjour tout le monde. 81 years ago today, tyranny bowed when the courage of free men forced open the gates of liberation. Within hours, the people of Saint-Mère-l'Église had control of their destiny again. Within 3 months, the tricolour once again flew from the Eiffel Tower. Within a year, the continent of Europe would once again know peace. It is a rare thing to have changed the course of history, but that is what the veterans of Normandy did. They fought for a future that they knew they may not live to see. And through their valor, we inherited a free world. We are humbled to be in your company. We give eternal thanks for your sacrifice. And I'm also grateful to the Comité Débarquement as the stewards of our shared history. With every year that passes, your work becomes more important. And 81 years on, we return to Normandy to ask, what principle guided 150,000 souls across that body of water? What belief compelled the paratroopers of the 82nd and the 101st to thunder through the skies above us? What force drove the Ivymen to charge these dunes at Utah? All to liberate people they had never known in a land they had never seen. And that is the power of unity, the power of friendship, the faith in democracy and freedom. And through the sacrifices made on these shores, we learned the true strength of alliances, the strength of our warfighters standing together as they continue to do on operations today. Personnel from Manchester, from Marseille, from Minnesota. The strength of our nations standing together in NATO to deter current conflicts and adversaries. The responsibility to safeguard D-Day's legacy of freedom rests today with us. So let us give everlasting honour to our Normandy veterans, for whom the longest day never ended. And let us find the strength to carry on in their names and to carry forward their cause. Thank you.
Allocution de Monsieur Exet, secrétaire à la Défense des États-Unis d'Amérique.
Sebastian, ministers, generals, troops, our French friends, and of course, our heroes. The men of that day, the men of those days, the men of those weeks, the families and communities who loved them, who clung to a photo and newspaper clippings, with an understanding that young men from farm towns and city kids, rich and poor in all backgrounds, had sailed to a land far away to fight for people they never knew. Because in America and across the free world, we fight not because we hate what's in front of us, but because we love what's behind us. It's a special kind of love. A love that recognizes and understands that it requires sacrifice. You see, when I think of June the 6th, all I think of is the price of freedom. All I think of is what it took to walk off the back of a ramp on a Higgins boat, bullets whizzing, bombs dropping, waves crashing, equipment clamoring on your body, trying to stay afloat, trying to find cover, trying to find a medic, trying to find a bunker, all while under unrelenting fire with almost no chance of success. What motivates a man to do such thing? I think it's love. Not just love for your country or love for a cause, but love for one another. Which when you ask those men, they remember the man on their right and on their left. They remember the nurse that cared for them. They remember those that rest here, who we honor today, who we will never forget. You see, their legacy is a gift to us. And the question is, what will we do with it? Will we live worthy of it? And today I think it's a moment to ask all of ourselves the very same question. Could I do that? Could you do that? Could we do that? Could our countries muster that? Do we believe in ourselves enough to invest in ourselves, to project power, to defend freedom, and deter war? That's our question. That's our job at every level, from the Secretary of Defense to the Minister of Defense in France and the UK, NATO, and across the world. But also down to each family, each parent, each community, each school, each church. Are we raising up young men and women who understand the price of freedom, who understand that history is not over, who understand that there's goodness and there's brotherhood and there's things worth fighting for? But in order to cherish and have those things worth fighting for, you have to be willing to stand for them when it matters the most. So I want to thank all the troops here today from all countries, the flags behind us, the coalition that continues to this day, our friends in France who continue, as you drive through these beautiful towns, to wave American flags, to wave British flags, to wave Canadian flags, because they have not forgotten. And may we, as leaders, as troops, and as citizens, never forget ourselves. Long live the American Republic. Long live the French Republic. And may God bless the heroes of June the 6th. Thank you.
You're with BBC News Live, and we are following the 81st anniversary, commemorating the D-Day anniversary. I can take you now to some pictures, some live pictures, and these have been wonderful to watch, because what's happening right now is the local dignitaries are actually taking up some of the children to lay the wreaths, which is absolutely heartwarming to see. 81 years later, these children remembering those brave men who fought during D-Day. I'll just let you watch those while I just talk a little bit about what we heard from the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. I mean, some powerful words from him in his speech. He was talking about remembering those men all those years ago, talking about a special kind of love that we have for what happened all those years ago. And also he mentioned, you know, he posed the question, what will we do with their legacy? Could I do that? Could we do that? Could our countries do that? Which I thought was very, very interesting, and a very interesting thing to include in his speech. We also heard as well a little earlier on from the British Defence Secretary John Healey and also Sébastien Lecornu, the French Minister of Armed Forces. Let's just have a little listen in and see what we can hear at the minute.
Dépôt de gerbe par Monsieur Lecornu, ministre des Armées.
So the speeches have finished. It's a little quiet at the moment because we're just witnessing some of the children who are laying the wreaths down to those who have fallen. A little later on, I think we're going to hear some national anthems, and we'll also hear some more speeches to the veterans who are there today. You are watching BBC News Live. We are at a ceremony in Normandy where the US Defence Secretary and the UK Defence Secretary John Healey have been talking about some of, talking about the importance of today, 81 years later. We also heard as well from Pete Hegseth as well, the US Defence Secretary. While we have a look at these pictures, oh, here we go. We've got the salutes as well. Very, very proud day for these men and their families. So we can hear some of the national anthem, I think, going to be played from France and the US. That was the Canadian anthem being played there. We're just listening into some of the national anthems being played live at this event in Normandy, commemorating the 81st anniversary of D-Day. So we're just listening to some of the national anthems, the D-Day landings on the 6th of June 1944, 81 years ago, the largest seaborne invasion in history. Nearly 160,000 Allied troops landed on D-Day, made up of majority of forces from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and 12 other Allied nations. As you can imagine, a very, very proud day for all of those who fought, their families, and, well, everybody else watching around the world right now. So you're watching BBC News Live. We're following the 81st anniversary commemorations of D-Day today. We've just been hearing some of those national anthems. I think we can hear a little bit more. There we heard the British national anthem, one of many that they're going through at the moment while they salute the fallen. We've been seeing pictures of some of the veterans there. It's a long day for them, but an emotional one as well. I'm sure memories will be flooding back of that day. BBC News Live. We're following the 81st anniversary commemorations of D-Day today. You might be able to recognise some of these national anthems. We've already heard from the likes of the US, UK, Canada, Australia, Belgium, France, Greece, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Poland and others. The D-Day landings on the 6th of June 1944 was the largest seaborne invasion in history. Nearly 160,000 Allied troops landed on D-Day, made up of major forces, as I say, from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada and 12 other Allied nations. Now, various events have been taking place in Normandy. What you're looking at right now, some live pictures from Utah Beach in Normandy. And a little earlier on, it's been a busy day actually. We've been hearing from the likes of Sébastien Lecornu, the French Minister of Armed Forces, also the US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who gave quite an interesting speech, a very powerful speech, talking about what will we do with their legacy. Could I do that? Could we do that? Could our countries do that now? Posing some very interesting questions. He was also talking about the special kind of love that we have and still hold very dearly 81 years later for these brave, brave men and what they went through. Well, men and women who went through during D-Day. We also heard as well from the British Defence Secretary, John Healey. He's there along with many other dignitaries. We can see now that they're going to have a few more speeches. They have been laying wreaths. We've actually seen some heartwarming pictures actually of children laying wreaths, remembering what happened 81 years ago. We've seen salutes to the fallen during those national anthems, and I think we're just about to see the ceremony conclude. Let's just have a little listen in to the finale. There we have the three leaders I was talking about a little earlier on. Sébastien Lecornu, French Minister of Armed Forces. We've also got John Healey, the British Defence Secretary, and the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth. You're with BBC News Live. We're following the 81st anniversary commemorations of D-Day today, and you've been watching some live pictures from Normandy where we've had that very special ceremony taking place. We've had leaders from around the world, Sébastien Lecornu, the French Minister of Armed Forces, along with John Healey, the British Defence Secretary, and US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth as well. We were speaking a little earlier on to our Paris correspondent Hugh Schofield about some of the key points of today. But what we will take away from this is it's been a very emotional day, a very poignant day, and we've heard some incredible speeches from some big leaders around the world. Just to remind you again, it is the 81st anniversary of D-Day. On this day, troops from the UK, US, Canada and France attacked German forces on the coast of northern France. D-Day being the largest military seaborne operation ever attempted and marked the start of the campaign to liberate Nazi-occupied northwest Europe. You're watching BBC News.